Good morning to everyone gathered here. On behalf of our institution, it's my immense pleasure to extend the warmest welcome to our honorable resource person, esteemed management, and all of you gathered here for today's global conference. Before we start, let's take a moment to calm our mind. I invite everyone to stand by for the silent prayer. Thank you, everyone. A warm welcome is the foundation of lasting connection. And today, we celebrate this moment of unity and shared purpose. Now I invite Varsha to officially welcome the gathering.
Good morning, everyone. The world is full of diamonds and gems, and we are having some of them here today. With this note, I would like to welcome our resource person, management, organizing committee, my dear friends who have taken a step forward to join this confluence. On behalf of our institution, I feel incredibly honored and privileged to welcome our resource person of the day, Professor Ramdas Chandra. Your presence is a source of inspiration for us and a great moral booster to the entire community. Welcome, sir. I extend a heartfelt welcome to our director and faculty members who have always supported us in spreading the light of knowledge. Finally, I would like to welcome all my fellow friends who are an integral part of this institution. With that, I wish you all have a great day ahead and I hope you have a great learning experience. Once again, welcome you all.
Thank you, Varsha. And now I request Bharatwaj to introduce our chief guest.
Good morning, honorable present here. It is a distinct honor to introduce our esteemed educator and global thought leader whose deep expertise in international business and trade policy will enrich our discussions today. Currently an associate professor of professional practice at Rutgers University, Professor Ramdas Chandra combines decades of academic and industry experience to illuminate the complexities of global economic dynamics. Over a remarkable 25-year career, Professor Chandra has held influential academic positions at Nova Southeastern University, Concordia University, and Long Island University, nurturing future business leaders with his profound knowledge and vision. His academic journey spans a PhD in international business from New York University Stern School of Business, an MBA from the University of Delhi, and a bachelor's in mechanical engineering from the Maharashtra Institute of Technology, which are all testaments to his diverse and comprehensive expertise. Specializing in trade policy, pricing frameworks, and strategic mechanisms, Professor Chandra has dedicated his career to addressing challenges at the intersection of theory and practice. Today, he will guide us through the theme frameworks for setting prices, strategies, and mechanisms, offering an actionable insights to enhance competitive advantage in dynamic global markets. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Professor Ramdas Chandra. As today we delve into the strategies that drive effective and sustainable pricing in today's business landscape at this global conference. Thank you.
Thank you, Bharatwaj. I'm pleased to invite our esteemed resource person, Professor Ramdas, to lead us into the session.
Thank you so much. You guys hear me? Well, sorry about the technology issues. supposed to be an engineer, but obviously I didn't know how to fix this. So real pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me. Like I was explaining to your director, I left this country in 1992. I come back every year, but this is a real honor to be here. My background is, like I said, I started in engineering. I worked for Franklin Norton in product design, moved into marketing, and that's when I got my first lesson in business. My boss put me in his office and he said, "You're a very good engineer, but you're a terrible manager." And he said, "Go get an MBA." So I said, "Okay, I'll go get an MBA." And I went and got an MBA from FMS Delhi and moved into pure sales, which I thought I was going to be terrible at, but turned out to be pretty good at. But got very bored of it because I get bored very easily. So I moved from sales to brand management, and then I discovered that brand management is not what you read in textbooks. It sounds so exciting, all these wonderful advertising campaigns and this and that, but I was managing Marico's parachute opener oil. And they told me very clearly, you can't touch the brand. You just manage it, that's it. So I became a glorified accountant, essentially. So I quit that and moved to New York, got my PhD there. Mostly in international business, but then I wandered into strategy and other areas. Moved to Canada, Montreal, taught there for 10 years, worked with the Export Development Corporation in Ottawa, the capital of Canada. Moved back to New York, then moved to Florida, where I ran the international business program there. That's where I started my interest in entrepreneurship and startups and those kinds of things. Worked with what we call the Florida Economic Development Agency, mostly with the small businesses. Also worked with the state of California for small businesses and startups. Then moved to Rutgers in New Jersey, where I continue to do work with the SBA. So every state in the US has something called the Small Business Administration, which I work with, mostly helping students start companies. So over the past 25 years, I've lost count of the number of startups that students have managed to get off the ground, and quite successfully now. So that's my passion in a nutshell. I won't be talking too much about international business today. I'll talk a little bit about pricing, and feel free to ask me questions or whatever else you want. Let's see. At the outset, let me say sorry because I have not really lived in India for a long time. So many of the examples I'll give you are from my experience in US, Canada, some degree, I guess Europe. What I want to do is talk a little bit about pricing from a slightly different perspective. Now, typically, pricing is taught in a marketing course. And the logic behind that was that usually salespeople and marketing people say prices, which makes sense to some degree. But the reality is that in most companies, prices are set after a whole bunch of other decisions are first made. You can't just set a price for a product or a service. You need to know what goes into the setting of that price. So the idea that pricing is more of a strategic exercise rather than come at a number exercise has grown now in the last few years. So that's what I want to spend some time on. So what I will like to do is start off with what we know currently about pricing, where the field is headed in terms of what's new in pricing, and show you some frameworks that have been used and are still being developed in some ways in certain sectors of the economy. And I'll try to give you as many examples as possible. So let me start with something very simple. If you were to look at a pricing chapter in a marketing textbook, they'd usually start off by saying, let's say there's 100 rupees on the table. You want to sell something for X number of rupees. You get to keep that X, and that consumer is going to pay the remaining part of the 100 rupees. it becomes a negotiation then. The more I can charge, the less the consumer gets and the more the seller gets. It's a zero-sum game. So if you pay a lower price, you win. If you pay a higher price, I win. Right? That's the approach that we take. It's called value extraction. The notion that as a seller, I want to take as much as possible from the consumer's pocket. It also assumes that most demand and consumers are relatively static. What does that mean? It means that you know what your income is, you know what your capacity to buy is, and you decide how much to buy, when to buy, based on those factors. But those factors change over a period of time, as we will see. We also assume that competition is a given in every industry. We know who our competitors are. But again, we will see that in many sectors of the economy, competition changes quite rapidly. And who is your competition becomes different. Right? Think about Apple as a product. When Apple started, what was their competition? Nokia. There was a cell phone business, basically. Today, Apple doesn't think of itself as a cell phone company. Right? They do a lot more than just selling phones. Every textbook will usually end with, this is how you set your price. So this is the consumer's willingness to pay. This is the elasticity of demand or whatever else that your textbook says. And therefore we set the price at so many rupees or euros or dollars or whatever. The reality is that we don't just arrive at a price. Take the case of the iPhone again. What do you think, anyone wants to guess, what do you think is the cost of making the iPhone? This little device, which you pay what, in India, what, 1 lakh? What's the price of this? How much do you think it costs to make? Sorry? There you go. But you're able to charge $800 for it. So are you telling me that the value to the consumer is $750 that they're willing to pay as premium? Is that the actual value of this device? Not really, right? How do they arrive at this price of $800 or $900 or $1,100? It's not based on manufacturing costs, obviously. It's also not based on the willingness to pay for this particular product if you didn't do other things. So for Apple to be able to sell this at $900 a piece, they need to justify why it is worth charging you $50 plus $850 to sell it to you. Right? Those are the choices that firms are making before they set prices. Cost plus pricing is a very outdated model. If you think about it, almost no company does cost plus pricing. Even the smallest businesses, cost plus is basically saying that I cannot go below this price. That's all it says. The actual price is not going to be anywhere close to what we would call manufacturing cost. Whether it's a product, whether it's a service, it doesn't matter. Right? So you're making these choices, but you can't set that price until you make those choices. So whatever features I'm going to build into this iPhone, I need to decide that first before I say $800 for this phone. That is a strategic choice. I could choose to make this everything under the sun. So I'll give you an example of this. Last year, around summer of 2023, one gentleman left Apple and he decided to create a new device. I don't know if any of you ever saw this, but I'm a tech freak. So anytime someone launches something new, I'll pay a premium and I test the product out. So this was an interesting product. It basically replaced this phone with something like this that you could attach to your collar or to your sleeve. In fact, he even experimented with implanting it in your ear. And it's a fascinating device because all it did was, once it was attached to you, you could look like this, you could point your hand like this, look at it, and the device would project onto your palm. You could use it as a phone, you could use it as a touch screen, you could do this, and the keyboard would appear on the desk, you could use it, sounded like in perfect duets. So I'm going to buy this one. So I signed up for it. It was launched at $650, and at that point, all it could do was text and phone, nothing else. Lovely idea, right? You think about it. I don't need to carry this anymore. And if I can implant it here, even better. I don't need to carry anything, right? All I have to worry about is how to charge it. That's all it is. Problem is, most people don't buy this for taking phones. I have two daughters, as you can tell from my gray hair, both much older. But I have to remind them once in a while, it's called a cell phone, not a cell texting device or a cell WhatsApp device. Right? But that's all you can do with that device. What do most of you use your phone for? Messaging, video calls, but you call their parents? No, I'm kidding. My daughters will never answer their phones. If I call them, no, they say, please text me. So I have to text them. I learned the whole idea of WhatsApp was my limit of my technological capabilities. So I still have a deal with my daughter. She has the same phone as me, and if I don't know what to do with it, I call her and say, answer me and tell me what I should do next. So that was my introduction to what I could do with the cell phone. In the US, most people use it for streaming. Almost no one has TV anymore in the US. And most people will carry one of these types of things and project it to a wall. Wherever they're sitting, I can just project it over here. So why do I need the TV? I can stream, I can communicate, I can take pictures. Think about my generation of how we, and I was just joking about this with one of my school friends. We went to Bhutan way back in the early 1980s. And in those days, you had films. I'm sure most of you have never seen it. But you got 36 or 24 exposures, you plugged it into a camera, pulled the strip out, attached it to other end of the camera, shut the thing carefully, and then moved it manually for each exposure. And you could take only 24 pictures or 36 pictures. That's it. And then you had to go to a dark room to develop it. Kodak, the company that did it, no longer in existence, by the way. And only a few places could develop the film. And once you got the negative, you printed it out and you could make copies. Who does that anymore? How many of you have a camera for that matter? You have a camera. One out of all these people, right? But you take pictures. My bet is, if you go to a restaurant and you order something nice, the first thing we do is take a picture, right? We're still achieving the same goal, but with a different device. So that little label film that I bought was nice to make phone calls, but if my daughters are not going to answer me, then it was a useless device. I was not able to do anything with it. I couldn't stream, I couldn't access my Netflix. Not that I watch Netflix, but no TV, no news, no internet, the traditional way that we use our phones. So the device bombed, basically. Nobody was willing to pay $650, even though it sounded so exciting. So, but these are choices that a firm has to make before. Every product or service, whether it's banking, whether it's insurance, whether it is construction, you make choices before you set the price. Those choices have consequences. Right? And I like to think about these consequences at 3 levels. The most obvious is for the firm itself. Take the smallest possible business. They have to make a profit. So you can't do everything for every customer. So you make choices. Who am I going to serve? What percentage of the market do you think I can reach? What percentage of that market is willing to pay for my services or my product? And then you make those choices and you limit yourself to what you can do. So the first and most obvious consequence of price is whether a firm is going to make a profit or not. And that's a fundamental objective of any business, right? Even if you're a not-for-profit organization, revenue minus cost cannot be negative. Somewhere you have to make it at least zero, if not positive. So that's a very obvious consequence at the firm level. But at the market level, industry level, pricing has some very interesting consequences. And we don't think about this, okay? But when let's take a product like cars. When the automobile was first invented, there was one model. It was made by a company called Detroit Auto Works. And they made the most expensive cars. Not just that, if anything went wrong with the car, the servicing and the parts were very expensive. And you could go to only one place to get it all. So who could afford that? Maybe 0.01% of the market. So most people did not drive cars. Even though the automobile was invented in the 1800s, it wasn't until Henry Ford came along in early 1910 and said, you need to make this automobile more affordable. So he started backwards. He said, what is the price that the average consumer can pay? And then let me build a business model that works for it. And that was the famous statement that he made, that you can buy any color car you want as long as it is black. What was the idea behind that? That my entire production infrastructure would be based on standardization, which allowed me then to cut costs of every single component along the way. And by specializing in the form of an assembly line, I could control my costs. So Ford came along and priced his car at a much lower price than Detroit Auto. Anyway, so back to Henry Ford. So he set up this whole assembly plant system and started selling the car at almost about first 40% and eventually about 20% of the cost of what Detroit Auto Works was able to sell it at. What did that do to the industry? It opened up an entire segment of the market that before that did not drive cars. It also allowed, if you think about it, the entire interstate system in the United States, or the Autobahn system in Germany, and the European highways, they all emerged because people started driving. Otherwise, why would we build roads? In fact, the first highway that was built in the US across states, I-76, they called it the road to nowhere because nobody was driving. But once you build the cars that people could afford, then it made sense to build the roads. And once you built the roads, it made sense to buy the cars. So entire industries were affected by the simple idea that you lower the price of the car and you created a whole industry. Now think about all the other industries that are attached to automobiles. It's not just you and me buying cars. We rent cars. What is the rental model? You're basically saying, I'm paying per use as opposed to for the entire asset. What is Uber, ride sharing? It's basically saying, I have excess capacity of an asset and I'm going to use that excess capacity to extract revenue. But these models are not about maximizing profit. If you think about it, Uber is not maximizing profit. Lyft and all these ride-sharing operations or Airbnbs, they don't sell at the maximum possible price because they're built around the idea that the bigger the network of people, both on the supply side as well as on the demand side, the more likely you are to survive. In other words, I'll leave something on the table for the seller and the buyer to share. Even though I can actually charge a higher price, I won't, because it allows me to build scale. Entire industries develop through this pricing model. The notion of financing cars emerged again from the idea that people could not afford to pay upfront, so let's figure out a way to price it where you paid over a period of time. And the entire financing industry was born as a result of that. Now that also led to the creation of in the US and in Europe, the entire sector that did credit history. So, for example, if I want to buy something in the US that is a big asset like a car or a house or something, they will look at my credit history. Why did that come about? Because people were borrowing money that they did not have. So how do I know that I should be lending you money? By finding out whether you have a history of payments, repayments, and those kinds of things. We don't have that system over here. Our credit check is basically the big man in the stick. But we are going towards that, right? If you think about it, what is digital cash doing? It's allowing you to now track purchasing history and transaction history. Over a period of time, you can build a database and say, person A has borrowed so much money over their lifetime and returned so much of it. So, viable borrow. And then there are social outcomes of pricing. And I'll end towards this session talking about some of these social issues. But pricing of things like pollution, traffic. How does the toll authority decide how much toll to charge? What is the basis for that decision? Should it be 100 rupees? Should it be 200 rupees? Where does that number come from? It's not based on cost, obviously. It's not based necessarily on willingness to pay either. In London, we have something called the London tax, which means that if you have not registered your vehicle in the borough of London and you want to drive through London, you have to pay £35 just to drive your car through London. Singapore charges you based on your license plate and what day of the week you drive. That's not based on willingness to pay or cost. That's based on trying to restrict traffic. Manhattan is now experimenting with a tax for New York City. And there's a big debate going on between now and 20 years. They're trying to set the price of what it should cost for someone from New Jersey or someone from Long Island to bring their car into New York City. The number that they threw out first was $15. Now they're saying $8. Someone else has come up with $10. Where does this number even come from? But there are consequences to it. Because if you charge $15, the organization that's collecting it now has greater resources to maintain the highways and maintain the bridges and maintain the tunnels. But it also means that fewer people can cross into the city. So it's a trade-off, right? There are social consequences. Who pays, for example, for electricity in India? Depending on the sector that you are in, you pay different rates. Depending on the geography that you are in, you pay different rates. Why? Who decides that? But it has long-term consequences for us. Because if we don't allow farmers to access power at the rate that's affordable to them, you and I will not have food. So there are social consequences of pricing also. We will talk about that also. So moving on, more and more pricing is based on this idea of collaborative pricing, which is, it's not a zero-sum game. Just because I got more profits, I did not quote-unquote win, because eventually, and Apple is a good example of this, and we'll come back to Apple. But there are so many examples. In India, for example, Airtel and Jio went into this battle on pricing of telecom products. One is based on cost, one is based on value. The idea that you can leave something on the table and still be sustainable and profitable in the long run. Collaboratively. We talk about value sharing, not value extraction. Think again of all the ride sharing, Airbnbs. We had this incident in the US a couple of days ago in New Orleans, and the vehicles that were used for that attack were rented on a site called Toro. Toro is basically saying that I have a car that I'm not using, and I can go onto this platform and rent that car out from you directly without going through an intermediary. That's a different type of sharing model. All of these models are basically saying that I'm not extracting full value, I'm sharing value. Basically. It also means that consumer demand is not static. So if you look at Uber as an example, and that's where dynamic pricing comes in. Peak traffic time, price goes up. When the traffic is less, price goes down. Right? It's not a static process, which means that, sorry?
Singapore does it very effectively.
Very.
Environmental road pricing.
And we had that in Montreal in Canada, where on interstates, in the morning if you're going into downtown, your toll was higher. And it actually had cameras that sensed the traffic. And as the traffic increased, your toll went up. And it would actually go up to the point where people would say, I could just park my car and take the train. It's just not worth it anymore. So, but that's dynamic pricing for you, right? So it's not about numbers alone, it's about what makes the most sense at that particular point. So dynamic pricing is something that is becoming very common. By the way, I don't know if you know this, but Amazon changes its prices on a daily basis about 75 times for every product or service that they offer. On a daily basis. You may not notice it. It might be just a few, paisa here and there, or rupees here and there, but they do it regularly. That's based on demand. And we talk about yield pricing also.
Just an observation.
Yes, sure.
Recently we came across an article which talks about dynamic pricing. The pricing for a particular service or a product changes from Android to
Oh yeah,
iPhone.
yeah. Yeah, they do that, yeah.
And Uber, they charge a different pricing altogether.
And the logic behind that is the ecosystem of the iOS is a closed ecosystem.
Yeah.
So they actually extract some of their revenue from the apps itself, unlike Android, which is an open ecosystem. So they don't extract any revenue from the app. The third party keeps most of the app developing costs. So that's why the pricing is different. And you can't have the same model.
Airlines and hotels also do the same thing. Same hotel, same property, make maintenance will be one, clear will be another, whatever.
Well, the funniest part is if you take a flight, especially long distance flights, you could be sitting next to someone who has paid half the price and you're flying the same exact point, the same exact class, and the same, sorry? Well, it's all yield pricing, they call it. Airlines were the ones who started this whole idea of yield pricing. And again, the history for that is pretty interesting. Till 1970s, the biggest aviation industry was obviously in the US. And it was a very regulated industry. In other words, all the airlines charged the same price for point A to point B. You could not change the price. So Cathay Pacific and in those days, whatever that airlines were that are all defunct now, they all used to charge the same price, New York to Chicago, New York to San Francisco, and so on. And then the energy crisis hit, and Middle East began to squeeze Europe and the US for oil. And there was a big push for deregulation. And the aviation industry pushed to say that we should be able to set our own prices. And American Airlines in those days ran a ticket booking system called Sabre, which eventually became what you and I today use in MakeMyTrip.com and other places, because they're all fundamentally the same platform. It doesn't matter what website you go to, the fundamental platform is the same. Right? So what they do is, they basically say, let me figure out your willingness to pay. Now how did they do that in the 1980s? If you're a business traveler, you didn't care what the cost was, because hey, the company is paying for it. If you're a leisure traveler, you cared about it, And you planned ahead. So if you try to book for a ticket 1 week from today, you paid more. If you planned 3 months ahead, you paid less. Leisure travel versus business travel. I have to travel versus. So you have this whole category of so-called budget airlines. And the poster child for that is Ryanair in Britain. It's one of those airlines that I would never fly on.
€1. €1 they take you from Frankfurt to London.
I'm sorry, I will not fly on that because I'm not sure which part of the plane is going to land. It's a hilarious airline. They wanted to actually at one point charge for using the bathroom in the. Sorry?
For the labs,
Yeah, they wanted to charge for that. And they actually experimented with something very unique. Standing passengers on the plane. Till the European regulators said, no, that's too dangerous. So, talk of budget. That whole category was built around basically college students saying that I have a weekend off, I want to go see my parents. That was the category that was built around. Right? And you had these spirits and the, one that went bankrupt just now in the US. All these US airlines that were all budget airlines, they all went bankrupt because the business model does not work. It's not the front end that's the problem, it's the back end. Because if you think about it, if you're flying a plane from point A to point B, some of the costs are fixed. The airport costs, landing costs, slotting allowances, which is the price that you pay to park at the gate, all of these are fixed costs. It doesn't matter whether you're charging $100 to the customer or charging 1,000 rupees. You're still going to pay the airport the same amount. So the only way you can then make that business model work is cut services, cut services, cut services. But at some point, consumers are going to say, I'm not going to do that. Right? So I was just joking with my mother about this. My mom is one of those people who will say, why should I pay for this? And I'm the opposite. And I'm flying, I'm like, I don't care, I'm paying, and I'm flying comfortably. And when you think about it, you reach a point where if you start cutting services to that level, you simply can't make that business model work. Your fuel prices are the same. The cost of labor is the same. The pilot costs are almost the same. What is it that you can really change? The food in the, or the lack of food inside the aircraft, services. And it's ironical how they design these things in the US particularly, because the airports are much bigger than in India. So if you're flying Spirit or one of these budget airlines, your terminal is, your gate is going to be the farthest gate. You're going to be walking about 25 minutes before you even reach your gate. And when you come off, your bag will come out last. You're going to be waiting for at least half an hour. So when you add up all these things, the actual cost to the consumer is much higher.
They use a different airport 30-40 miles away from the main
Oh, yeah.
airport.
So
when cars get parked there, for that they will charge too.
yes, absolutely. Yeah. And if you want to screw your seats, good luck. I mean, they'll charge you to an arm and a leg for that. But these are business models that are built around trying to give you the lowest possible price. Yield pricing was born out of this whole idea that different people are willing to pay different prices for the same product and the same service. Exactly the same product and service. And that still continues today in the aviation industry. So if you're flying from New York to Mumbai, which is the leg that I took just now, I know that I paid definitely less than what the person sitting next to me paid because I booked 3 months ago. And this guy booked 3 weeks ago. So I paid $1,500, he paid $1,800. So I mean, I have this weird habit of checking what money who paid. But that's good. Anyway, let's talk about the basic ideas of pricing. We start with value, right? And these three are not mutually exclusive. In other words, every firm has to think about it, but some firms emphasize one over the other. Take value as an example. Back to the iPhone. Before the iPhone came along, you know what was their most successful product? Before they made the iPhones? Sorry? No, what did Apple make that They almost went bankrupt, by the way, in the 1980s. They were 90 days away from filing for bankruptcy. Sorry? iPods. iPods. Those little things that you put the equivalent of the Sony Walkmans. The iPod was the first major success that turned around Apple. They were not known for making phones. In fact, at that time, 65% of the market share for cellular phones was Nokia. And there was one particular model, the 3200 model, which we used to call the brick. Yes, it was built like a brick. I mean, the battery was bigger than the phone. So it was in principle a mobile phone, but you needed a bag to carry it. And the joke used to be, that there was an ad actually on this one, that two people are arguing about whose phone is better. And he says, mine can do this, the other guy says, mine can do this. So finally one guy says, mine has theft deterrence, you can't steal my phone. The other guy says, what do you mean I can't steal your phone? So it's private. So the guy reaches out to take the phone, so he picks up the phone and throws it at him. The guy gets knocked out, the other guy gets the phone. We used to joke that you could drop that phone from the fourth floor of a building, nothing would happen to it. That was Nokia's claim to fame. iPod came along at a time when there were two products that you could use for music. No, before Apple. There was Rio, which was a device that you could put in your pocket and roam around, but you could carry a maximum of about 16 songs. That was it. Or you had the jukebox, which you could put 3,200 songs, but you needed a bag to carry it around. Then came the iPod, which said you can take 3,200 songs and put them on a small little device. And it looked so sleek, it was so fashionable, and it was priced lower than the Rio and the jukebox. Their logic was they were going to charge for the songs, not for the device itself. Right? But what did that do? It meant that if you had an iPod, the only way you could listen to music on that was if you subscribed to the services that allowed you to access the songs. So they made their revenue not on the hardware itself. They made it on the models that came after that, either per song, or per week, or per month, or those kinds of pricing models. The logic was that we'll almost, it's what I call the razor blade model. You buy a, for those of you who shave, if you buy a razor, the stick itself is dirt cheap, but the blade is very expensive, right? The printer cartridge model. The printer itself is dirt cheap, but the cartridges are much more expensive. The logic here is we leave some value on the table initially, but the value to the consumer comes from what you can do with it afterwards. Now, Nokia made a mistake in some ways, if you think about what they did, and we'll talk about differentiation later on. But Nokia tried to compete with Apple. In fact, the best cell phone that I've ever seen was the BlackBerry. The most secure. They were the first to market with touchscreens. They were the first to market with digital keyboards. The most secure, 128. In fact, they were banned in India because they refused to give India the source code for their operating system. And by the way, today if you're driving a car that has GPS and all those things, 90% of that software is BlackBerry. Canadian company Research in Motion, which led me to lose a lot of money because in those days, RIM was the biggest company in Canada, and we had to put 80% of our retirement account in Canadian stocks. So I kept investing in Research in Motion, and Research in Motion went from $10 to $20 to $160, and I was sitting very pretty. And then it went from $160 to $1, and I lost all of that. But they made the same mistake. They tried to compete with Apple on features, which was not their strength. Their strength was in building an operating system. Nokia's strength was in building a phone. If you ask my mom and their generation, what do they want from a phone? It should not break. And they want to be able to use it. That's it. And they want to make a phone call. If I tell my mom, Mom, You can watch Netflix on it, she'll say, what the hell is Netflix? She does not want to do that, right? There's a whole segment that Nokia could have targeted who wanted phones that did not break. But they tried to compete. BlackBerry did the same thing. They tried to compete with Apple by becoming cute. But that's not their strength, right? So the value of Apple was not in the device itself, but it was what the device could do after you got it. That's value-based pricing, right? In those kinds of sectors where you have a very small number of concentrated sellers and a very large number of fragmented buyers, it's the value that the buyers are looking for that matters more, because everyone's paying the same price for this. There is no differentiation in terms of price. The differentiation comes from what you do with it, right? So it's the value that you add after you buy the hardware. Uniform pricing, the idea that a seller sells the same product across the board uniformly to everyone. Now think about the Indian context. I was just reading an article on the thing over here. Fast-moving consumer goods, they've seen prices rise quite a bit in the last year or so. From what I understand, prices have gone up about 10 to 12%. I mean, they're wrong on the exact number, but somewhere along those lines. More than inflation, right? Now, if you're a seller, let's say you're selling, and I was looking at some products that they had listed in the magazine. One of them was wheat flour that you used to make rotis and those kinds of things. There's a company that sells it at twice the price that you can buy it from Reliance or DMart or all those kinds of places. But their price is fixed. It's uniform. It doesn't matter who they sell to. They're not changing the price. Their logic is pretty interesting. The logic is that this is what it costs us. We cannot sell below this price, right? But by giving you a uniform price, irrespective of what happens in the marketplace, we can plan our supply because we are not that big. If you ask us to change our quantity supply overnight, we can't do that. So what's the best way to make it work? Now from the buyer's standpoint, if you want to sell that product, you want to guarantee that that supplier is in existence tomorrow. So you don't want to squeeze that supplier to the point where she goes out of business or he goes out of business. So you arrive at a uniform price. We have a huge chain called Whole Foods in the US. Whole Foods specializes in slightly expensive, but very specialized kind of products, food products, that soups from all over the world, noodles from all over the world. But the sellers are all extremely small sellers, very, very specialized. So, I mean, to the point where one seller will make only Japanese soba noodles and nothing else. One seller will make only tomato soups and nothing else. But the interesting thing is, if you are going to Whole Foods, most people don't go in there to say, I'm going to eat noodles today. They go in there and say, I'm going to eat something. It could be noodles, it could be soup. So you're not competing with an identical product from the consumer's perspective. Now if you're a seller of these small products, you can't afford, inflation in the US also is very high, you can't afford to keep changing the prices, and Whole Food never changes their prices. They sell the same product at the same price constantly, irrespective of what happens to inflation and those kinds of things. So what do? You work backwards, and you say, we're going to pay you so much, for so much quantity, irrespective of what the market conditions are. That gives the seller a certain guaranteed profit, maybe not maximum, but some profit. Gives the buyer the ability to smooth demand and supply, which is important, right? And we can talk about electricity as an example of why demand smoothing is so important. But by uniform pricing, it reduces the volatility of profits. You're not saying that you can't make more money. You could potentially make more money. And I'll give you another example of this later on, Starbucks being a classic example of a company that overcharged for their products, and when inflation went through the roof, they started having sales problems. Now they're fighting with the issue of whether to cut prices and how much to cut it. But that's a problem for Starbucks because you can't just cut prices. You already agreed to pay certain things to certain parts of the supply chain. So if you cut prices, you're also going to lose profits. So there's a trade-off over there. So uniform pricing is basically saying optimize the price as opposed to maximize profits. There's a difference. And then there's cost in commodity type markets. And we generally think about commodities like wheat, grains, and those kinds of things. But it's not just those types of commodities. And I think India, for example, is now investing heavily in infrastructure, right? Highways, bridges, ports, all these kinds of things. If a company was to get a contract to build a highway, let's say from Coimbatore to Chennai, the cost for that company consists of two components: the fixed cost, which doesn't matter whether I'm building 1 mile of road or whether I'm building 100 miles of road. I still need certain fixed assets. And then the variable cost, which depends on the length of the road, the type of road, the number of curves on the road, the number of bridges on the road, and so on and so forth. That variable cost is unpredictable. But you get only one chance to bid for that project, because the government is going to put out a contract and say who wants to build it and what price are you willing to pay. And typically the government will say lowest price wins the bid. Not always, but more often than not. So how do you price in that market? You don't know what the other people are going to be pricing. And your cost structure is different from everyone else in the market. So what do? You build a base model and say this is your base cost. And then we add variable costs. And you're going to say for a particular project, this is what I can do, and if I can't do it at that particular price, then I give up that particular segment of the market. It doesn't make sense for me to compete there. So that's cost-based pricing. Right? Because in those industries, your cost matters. You can't simply just say, I'm going to make it at the lowest possible price, because it still has to be higher than your cost. And once you have bid for it, and you are committed to paying and building it at a particular cost, you can't say my cost went up by 50%. You simply can't do that, right? So in those kinds of industries, efficiency now becomes more important than anything else. It's not necessarily, and perhaps that's why we have the state of highways that we do have in many parts of the world, including where I live in Jersey. You would think that we are a developed country in the United States, but the roads in Jersey are pretty bad. And they blame it on the weather, but I think it's just poor construction. Because Florida has bad weather, but fantastic roads. So that's the basic three ideas of approaching pricing. Then you get into the actual frameworks of pricing. So you have what I would call the power framework. So think about your hard drives that we used to have earlier, or when you buy a phone or an electronic device that has 64 gig or 128 gig or whatever else it is. Apple does not make it, Samsung does not make it. There are basically two, maybe three major players who make all these storage drives, right? They build long-term contracts with the buyers of these hard drives and storage units. That's a power game. You negotiate basically. And you're trying to say that once I build that relationship, and once I have that contract, I don't want to break it because there is a value to that relationship. But it's a small number of buyers and a small number of sellers. So there is equal power between the buyers and sellers. Unlike the phone itself, where there is a large number of buyers, but only two sellers, Samsung and Apple for the most part. Here, you have the phone manufacturers, small numbers, and two, maybe three storage manufacturers. So small number of buyers, small number of sellers, equal power, it becomes a negotiation game. So there, you tend to work with things like tactical pricing, discounts, volume discounts, and so on and so forth. The next level of frameworks is what you call custom pricing. Right? What is the biggest trucking company in India now? It used to be Ashok Leyland when I was here. Tata. So think about a company like Tata making trucks. If you look at the number of trucks that Tata makes, probably the number of models is mind-blowing, right? It could be school buses, it could be large 18-wheelers if you want, transportation trucks, ambulances, you name it, different types of trucks. But the basic engine is the same, right? It's still a 4-stroke internal combustion engine. Power might change a little bit, but that's not a big chunk of the cost of making it. In those kinds of industries, if you're a school bus company and you're buying 100 buses, you want a different product than from someone who's going to haul lumber or steel across the country, right? So these are very customized products. So what does a company like Tata do? They make 5, 6 base models, and then depending on who the buyer is, they put on add-ons. And historically in these types of industries, the salesperson who was actually negotiating the contract would have the ability to say, you're buying 100 trucks, I'll give it to you at X rupees per truck. You buy 1,000 trucks, I'll give you at X minus something per truck. But that model is not sustainable in the long run. Right? If oil prices go up, if gas prices go up, if steel prices go up, everything changes in the production process. So now what these companies do, they set a floor and they say we'll allow a little bit of flexibility, but the flexibility comes from the features that you want to add. It's almost like saying if you were to buy something like in offices we use photocopy machines and all-in-one kind of giant machines. If you actually think about it, Xerox makes only one model with all the features already built into it. And then they disable the features. And depending on what features you want, you pay for each feature. It's the same model, one model, with all the features already there. So you and I will be buying exactly the same printer, but you pay 1,000 rupees, I pay 2,000 rupees, because they will enable some features, that's all. It's a software that they're using to enable those features, custom pricing. Depending on the number of features that you want, the price is different. But the base model remains the same. So therefore, I now, as a seller, have control over my costs. I know exactly what it costs me to build a particular product. All I'm doing now is that little adjustment to change the price depending on what you want.
I think this ERPs will the same thing, right?
All ERP software is the same thing. Salesforce.com does exactly the same thing. They disable certain features, and you want those features, you pay for it per salesperson or per feature, different pricing models in that. Yeah, but ERP is a classic example of that. Then you have the choice frameworks. I love this example because Starbucks is one of my pet peeves in life. I always ask my students, how many of you came to class today? And US students, they roll out of bed and they come sometimes in their pajamas to class, and they'll be all carrying Starbucks. And I ask them, how much did you pay for that Starbucks? $5 or something along those lines. The average US college student spends the equivalent of about $150 a month on Starbucks alone. If I were to buy a coffee machine and buy coffee pods and drink 6 cups of coffee a day, it would still cost me about 1/5 of that.
Professor, if you find time, you should visit lecture with small like Starbucks.
Yeah?
All the time you will have to be crowded. It's all 300 bucks.
Yeah, and what does it cost to actually make those things? But think about how Starbucks came along. Howard Schultz, when he worked for this company that was the predecessor to Starbucks, very successful takeout coffee chain, and they decided to stop making coffee, and that's how Schultz got into the Starbucks business. And he started off by saying, come buy coffee from me. Then he said, oh, you want a different flavor of milk? We'll give you that flavor. And then you want a different flavor of the coffee itself, and some of the flavors are mind-boggling. I don't know why I would even try something like that, but there are all kinds of flavors of coffee. So the average Joe who walks into a Starbucks, at least in the US, will go and say, I want a latte with light cream, with so much whistling on top, with exactly so much sugar and so much honey, and there'll be some 15 different features for each cup of coffee. Now, from the business model perspective, it's not very expensive for Starbucks. Because all you need to do is have those 15 ingredients, and then you need to start adjusting the level of the ingredients. But think about it when that becomes too complex, and that's what happened to Starbucks. Now, the amount of manpower that you require to run each Starbucks goes up. Because if 15 people want 15 different types of coffees, you need that much time and effort to make it happen, right? So your cost goes up. So the cost of coffee went up from $1.80 when I started drinking coffee to $5 a cup. So a flat black coffee with nothing in it costs you about $3. Think about it for a second. Why? Because I have to pay for all those other. It got to the point where Starbucks lost its mojo in the sense that why did people go to Starbucks in the first place? They went to Starbucks because it was a quiet place. You bought a cup of coffee, you could sit there forever and buy just that one cup of coffee. And they would never ask you to leave, and they gave you free internet, and you could work from there. I knew people who actually did not have offices and would work out of Starbucks. But the problem became, you have so many features and so many choices, it becomes too expensive a business model to run. So they decided, let's go cut back. And when they started cutting back, people said, I don't want to go to Starbucks anymore. It doesn't make sense. It's not what it used to be. So now they're trying to go retro. So they've gone through 3 CEOs in the past 2 years. The last one was an Indian guy that now they brought in this very young guy, 20-something years old, who's promised to turn around Starbucks. And the idea is that he's going retro. He's going to cut the number of choices. He's going to make it much more friendly. And Starbucks went through some serious issues when it came to racism and those types of things in their store areas, where black people were asked to leave the store and police officers were accosting customers who did not quote-unquote look like they should be at a Starbucks. And the whole ambiance of Starbucks vanished. So he's trying to bring that back now. But the problem is, the cost has gone up. So how do you now cut the costs? You cut the costs, you're also going to lose a lot of profits. And Starbucks actually decided not to give any earnings guidance last quarter because they knew that if they gave that guidance, their share prices would fall like a rock. Because they knew they would lose some money in the short term. The opposite problem companies in the fast food industry have, restaurant businesses in the US, they're dying. 2024 saw the largest number of chain closures of retail and restaurants in the US. Why? Prices went up faster than inflation, because inflation is one of those phenomena where there's an old joke about inflation. Wheat goes up, bread goes up. Wheat comes down, bread stays up. Right? So what happens with products like this is, you have set up a whole supply, you're McDonald's, you set up a whole supply chain. You can't just flip that supply chain around and say, I want to cut costs because inflation has gone up, so I want to charge a different price. What happens to your supply chain? You can't just rebuild that overnight, right? So there's a limit to how much you can increase your prices. And the more you increase it, one of two things is going to happen. People are going to go to the store and buy less, or people are going to stop going to the store. Foot traffic goes down, or in-store sales goes down. One of the two things is happening. And that's what's happening in the restaurant business in the US. And increasingly so in Europe also for that matter. Now, in India, we see a slightly different phenomenon where even though inflation has gone up, fast-moving consumer goods have actually seen an increase in their sales, which is kind of unusual, but also explained by a variety of different factors, including the fact that the Indian market is still a very growth stage market. The last of the frameworks is the dynamic pricing frameworks, which is the most interesting one. And we kind of underestimate the number of industries that use dynamic pricing. People think of airlines, people think of Ubers and so on. But every time you think about instruments like bonds, oil, aluminum, commodity commodities that are sold in bulk, buyers who are buying large amounts of these commodities. These are all dynamic pricing. And within dynamic pricing, the most commonly used pricing mechanism is auctions. We don't talk about auctions too much in business programs, but if you think about it, the vast majority of financial instruments globally, the vast majority of commodities, energy, transportation infrastructure, all these types of industries, the pricing mechanism is auctions, which is the extreme form of dynamic pricing. And auctions are not the typical James Bond auctions where someone is holding up a little thing that says, you bid 100, you bid 120. No, there are very, very different types of auctions. But these are basically saying that we don't have a set price. And the price changes every day. Right? So today, yield prices on government bonds issued by the Reserve Bank of India could be different 1 hour from now and different tomorrow morning. Why? They're sold in auctions that keep changing prices every year. Once you have these 3 ideas of approaching pricing and the 4 major frameworks, then you decide what is the pricing mechanism, fixed price mechanism. So you can walk into a Reliance store, you're not going to negotiate the price of bananas in Reliance or Kmart. It's a fixed price, right? But you buy the same bananas at a vendor on the street, you can negotiate, right? So you have fixed price or you have negotiated price. Within fixed prices, you might have segmented list prices, which is saying that you're buying so much, pay a lower price. You're paying less than, you're buying less than that, you pay a higher price. Quantity-based segmentation, feature-based segmentation, but it's fixed price. Negotiated prices could be open-ended, reference price. So you walk into a car dealership, typically they tell you X number of lakh rupees for a car, but you can negotiate that. But your negotiation begins at the price that they tell you, right? In the US, we joke about this. You walk into a car dealership, they put a big sign that says $29,999. And you ask the question, why $29,999? What is that $1 out of $30,000 doing to the price? Because it looks less than $30,000. It's the 20s, it's not in the 30s. Right? That $1 makes a difference on the $30,000 price of the car. But here's the interesting thing. What is the actual price of the car? Nowhere close to $30,000. Right? So what I did when I bought my Lexus was, I called one of my former students and I said, what is the dealer invoice price? And he said $16,000. And the dealer was started at $32,000 when I went to the dealership. When I knew his invoice price was 16. So I picked out the piece of paper and I said, invoice price is so much. Do you want to spend the rest of the day negotiating? Or do you want to give me a price somewhere close to that? And I bought the car in 19 hours. So, that's reference pricing for you. But most people will start at $29,999 and come downwards. And here's the interesting thing. Consumers feel satisfied if they pay less than $29,999. Go figure, right? The most interesting one is dynamic pricing. And every industry is using that. Retail sector, especially online retailing, bond pricing, energy pricing. If you look at now in India, we do have a very regulated energy industry, but in most other parts of the world, Germany is a good example of this, where if you're switching on the light over here, you are paying your bill to a particular utility company, but that company is not the one that's generating the power. They're buying that power in the open market from other players. So there are multiple players who sell energy to one utility company that then distributes it to the homes and offices and industries, right? How do they buy it? They buy it through auctions. And that's based on very dynamic pricing. So it actually happened in November of 2022, where because Germany invested so heavily in alternative energy, the demand was outstripped by the supply. Because you can predict how much coal you burn and how much energy you get. You can predict how much oil you burn and how much energy you get. But I can't predict what the sun is going to look like tomorrow and how much kilowatt hours I'm going to get from solar. I cannot predict wind energy. I cannot predict tidal energy. Those are unpredictable supply sources.
So when the percentage of these so-called renewable energy sources went up in Germany, the supply also went up. And there came a point where you were producing more than the market was demanding. And they were using a dynamic pricing model. And the software basically told the utility company, pay consumers to use electricity. Does that make sense from a business perspective? No. But there's the problem. If you're the energy company, you can't store that energy. Storage is one of the most expensive propositions in the energy industry. In fact, today's Economist has this whole thing about how power storage is going to become the next growth industry. Because if you're going renewable, what do you do with that energy if nobody's using it? I lived in Florida for some time, where FPL, the Florida Power and Light Company, they actually paid consumers. So let's say I put some solar panels on my house, and I generated more than I used. I could feed it back to the grid, and they would pay me for it. When too many people started doing that, FPL started saying this is a loss-making proposition for us. So business model doesn't work. Right? So dynamic pricing can be a very tricky thing. Companies like Amazon that use dynamic pricing basically say, and AI has become the big thing over there. I'm doing some work with a startup company on AI and dynamic pricing. And one of the problems that we're facing is this, that the model throws out all kinds of predictions and all kinds of recommendations that don't make sense. Because garbage in, garbage out. That's the old rule of programming, right? And AI models will tell you, drop the price because the demand has decreased. But if you keep on dropping the price based on what AI is telling you, at some point, what happened in Germany will happen to your product or service, where you're selling it at a loss. So most of these dynamic pricing models are now built around some kind of control systems, which is where the human touch comes into play. So it's not as simple as just saying, let's go yield pricing. Auctions, another interesting tool. You have open-ended auctions, closed-ended auctions. You have second-best auctions. The most common form of auctions are what we call in the US Dutch auctions, which ironically are not really from Holland, but from England. These are auctions where you start at a very high price and you start lowering the price. And most commodities are sold that way. So you basically set an excessive price and then you ask someone, are you ready to pay this? No, then you lower it. It actually turns out to be more efficient for the seller to start at a higher price and come down than to start at a lower price and go up. And intuitively it should make sense, because think about it for a second. If I start at a very high price, you know that the only person who's going to come into the market as you start lowering the prices are the people who are willing to pay the highest price. Whereas if you start at a low price, there might be someone who is willing to pay a higher price, but if nobody else is going to pay it, then I get it at a lower price. So second best auctions or Dutch auctions turn out to be the more common way of dynamic pricing in most commodities and most bond markets, financial markets. So if you look at currencies as an example, because a dollar is a dollar is a dollar, whether you buy it in Hong Kong, whether you buy it in India, or whether you buy it in the United States, it's the same dollar, right? So there, the people who are buying the dollars are not people like you and me, but these are the big financial institutions. And most of it is auction-based, and most of it is based on huge volumes, and that's where dynamic pricing becomes interesting. So when the markets in Singapore close, markets in North America are opening up. If there is even a 0.001% difference in price in Singapore versus New York, it vanishes within a fraction of a second. That's how efficient dynamic pricing is in these markets. So that's your pricing strategy model that I'd like to leave you with. So you have the big pricing architecture, which is all those frameworks that we just talked about and mechanisms and so on. Then you have the tactical pricing things, discounts, all those things that you use in the short term. So this is the long-term pricing model. This is the short-term pricing incentives and discounts and so on and so forth. But the fundamental drivers of pricing still remain those three things: value, uniformity, and cost. And again, we can spend hours on this. Some concepts that you should know if you're in business. Supply and demand sounds so simple. Supply, demand, boom, where it intersects equilibrium in the market. Not that simple. Most markets don't work that efficiently. Right? If they did, we wouldn't be having jobs. But it's important to understand supply and demand. And most industries have what we see, this kind of a supply curve and this kind of a demand curve. It's rarely this way or this way. It tends to be incremental, not linear. Elasticity, the notion that if I lower or increase prices, the demand changes. Again, it's not that simple. Just because I change the price by 1% doesn't mean demand is going to also change by 1%. And here's where the implementation of pricing models becomes important. If I want to change the price of half a dozen bananas on a daily basis because in the marketplace for commodities, banana prices are fluctuating, imagine the menu costs for a retailer. Each time I have to go and stick a different sticker that says the price has changed. I can't do that every day for 1,000 products in my retail store. So you don't necessarily change prices based on elasticity. You change it based on the cost at the back end of changing prices also. The idea of differentiation sounds, in marketing, it's a mantra almost, right? Differentiate your product and you can charge a premium. But the reality is, and the thought experiment that you can use is this. Think about a beach with a very, very flat distribution of consumers on that beach. So there's one consumer every foot, let's say. And there are two ice cream sellers. Where do you think they should locate? In the middle or at the far end? Intuitively you would say far end. But here's the catch. If both of you locate at the far end, there is incentive for me to move slightly towards the middle because I can get a few more consumers from this side. But if I do this, you're going to do the same thing. Eventually, there's no differentiation. Right? It turns out to be much harder to implement differentiation models than you think. And that's where Nokia's and BlackBerry's made the mistakes. Because you try to be the same as Apple. And if there's one thing that you want to really pick up for dynamic pricing for game theory, it's a really useful tool to understand how price competition works in the real world in dynamic pricing models. Again, we don't have time to go through all of that. I'll leave you with these kind of thoughts. And by the way, if you want the PowerPoint, I'll share it with you guys. But I did want to touch very briefly on these externalities. Pollution is a classic example of this. You drive a car, I don't drive a car, let's say. You pollute the atmosphere, I'm breathing it. It's like saying there is a no smoking section in this classroom. And this portion of the classroom begins to smoke, you're going to get that smoke. And I'll tell you this from personal example. I live in Montreal, cold as hell. And in the winters, you're not allowed to smoke inside the buildings. So what would people do? You would all come just outside the front door entrance and smoke over there. So you have 100 people smoking at the entrance. So by the time I walk into that building, I walk past about 20 cigarettes before I enter the building because that smoke is all smoking right at the entrance. So you smoke, but I pay the price for it. Asymmetry of cause and effect. Pollution is a classic example of this. And if you think about it from a global perspective, the countries that pollute the most are the ones that pay the least for the pollution. Why did Saudi Arabia push so hard last month not to allow any agreement on plastic pollution? Because plastic is a byproduct of petroleum refining, and that's where they make their money. Right? But who pays the price for it? Tiny islands in the Pacific and in the Atlantic and the Indian Oceans. There are countries like Cocos Islands and so on, which have 100,000 people. Their entire economy is built around fishing. They don't have plastic, they don't know what plastic is, but their beaches are full of plastic that is discarded by countries like India and China. there is an asymmetry of how do you price this in the real world. Or electricity in India. You give it away for free in some parts of India. Other people pay more. There is a mismatch between the people using it and the people who need it. Because if it's free, I don't care, nobody uses it anyway. But the cost of generating that power is still being borne by everyone. Any one of these kinds of industries where we call externalities exist, where there is an asymmetry between who uses it and who pays the price for it, and the cost of cleanup, which is hard to measure by the way. Pricing becomes a problem. Traffic, highways, all these types of industries face externalities. And that becomes a social pricing problem. So if you think about how much should we charge for pollution, should we be charging it on a per ton emission of carbon, or should we cap it and say you trade the cap? Economists will tell you that the best way to do it is tax it. The problem is there is an asymmetry. The people who can afford to pay will pay to pollute, and the people who can't afford to pay will not be able to pay to pollute. So a cap and trade system might be more effective, but less efficient from an economic standpoint. So it's a trade-off. So social pricing issues are something that we are still grappling with, and that's something that I think will become important for a lot of industries, particularly as we go towards models of growth which are built around public-private partnerships. Ready? I think I'll stop over here. Thank you very much for your attention, and if you have any questions, shoot away. Any questions, anyone? I'm not used to lecturing for 1 hour. You know, my daughters tell me, Dad, if you talk, I go to sleep. So, no questions? Okay. Right. Thank you so much.
Can I, on this aspect of value pricing, what I have mentioned is stuff like features, keep adding, then we say,
Right.
it does control 1, 2, 3 weeks.
Yeah.
Now I'm building a product which will also control a 4th lead, 5th lead, 6th lead like that. So then I keep building the price. To that extent, we did conduct a price sensitivity survey to understand from the customer what is that you will pay for this, which is the normal price which is prevailing in the market, similar market. And then okay, if you also control this, what do you think? You know, a question which is not supported, help and then unhelp kind of thing. Then they will be found a little bit. Do you think it can be a little more? That looks too much. Maybe this? Yes.
Right. So then again, bundling becomes a very interesting.
Yeah, exactly. And then we also triggered what is called the unfelt need. Felt need is yes, there are needs.
We need it right now, and that's it.
And the need, you use this interculture, for example, how much does it cost? You got to maintain a pair of cattle? You'll spend at least 100 rupees. Okay, if this product is used, you don't have to do that interculture. What Swiggy has done or Zomato has done, we all look for Chinese cuisine and Mexican cuisine and all that. That's different. It is not felt. What is not felt is the same Mexican food can be delivered at home, not felt. But that was triggered. What do you think? And they charge what today? What is that thing? $1 equivalent in Indian rupees, they charge for getting delivered at home. But the other way around is, you save the trouble of taking a motorcycle or a car.
So you're paying for the convenience.
Absolutely.
That's it, yeah. You're not paying anything for the value of the product itself. You're paying for the convenience of using it. Yeah. That's a different type of pricing, I guess. You know. But
An interesting topic, very interesting topic. And I always keep saying that never feel shy to charge the right price. But identify the product will deliver that. There's no
That's-
point just hiking the price.
yeah, typically that's what we do, right? When the cost goes up, they hike the price. And that's not the best model.
Really justified. Interesting, Professor. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
I have a question.
Sure.
Not exactly question. I would like to understand what is happening in US and other countries because you have a good experience. as far as India is concerned, the quick commerce is on the rise. Last couple of years, they've been working and so many players are getting into it. Zepto started out and subsequently Blinkit joined and Instamart from Flipkart. So many people have joined the bandwagon. Now they are promising to deliver the goods in 10 minutes. That too at a subsidized price. Now my question is, what would be the business model behind that? And is it existing in a country like US, quick commerce?
We really don't have that much of that kind of. If you want to pay for delivery, you pay a premium.
Okay.
So I can get groceries in 10 minutes,
Okay.
but I will pay a premium for it.
Oh.
Unlike people here. Now, I think this business model is not sustainable in the long run. Because one is, it works till you build a certain scale, but beyond that scale,
That's
not
right.
you're capping your growth.
Yeah.
Right? And as the scale increases, this is one of those models where the cost also increases with the revenue. So it's not like Uber, where I build a platform, and the more people who come in, the cost of multiplying that platform is the same. So if I use a piece of software, one time was 100 times. The cost of producing the software is the same. But that's not the case with this particular scenario. Because if 100 people are using it, the cost goes up 10 times if 1,000 people use it. The cost also goes up 10 times. So you're not going to be able to build revenue faster than cost, eventually. So my guess is that this is not a long-term sustainable model. And the more the people that use it, the harder it's going to get to make profit on that. That's my guess.
Will there be an opportunity to implant some sub-distribution out of India? There's no problem with much more.
Well, we can always try the Amazon model, which we're trying to do in the US now, which is have a drone come and deliver your groceries to you. Sorry? Well, the problem is what happened in Jersey last week, which is suddenly drones appeared in the sky and nobody knew where the drones came from. So that's a problem, right? You don't want a drone floating around in your backyard. So again, there are legal limitations and other limitations that come in. But manpower is not an issue. By the same token, it's going to increase, right? The price of labor has increased in India.
People have started talking about pollution because they use the vehicle.
Yeah.
All the delivery men, they use the vehicle. I think this is.
And that's why social pricing comes in. You have to, how do you price that into things? So do you charge them now for each delivery for the amount of carbon monoxide that you're emitting?
Can you take a couple of questions from the students? My students are slow starters.
Slow
So
starters.
they need some.
So I can always do what I do in my class, which is throw something and say, your turn.
Yeah, any questions?
Sure.
Thank you for the.
No worries. Go ahead.
And I wanted to ask that there is costly pricing and expensive pricing. There are differences between that.
Right.
So how are expensive prices being placed for the brand?
Depends. So you have some categories of products like luxury handbags, for example. You'll never see a Gucci on discount because you know that if you discount a high-end brand, the value of the brand goes down. If anything, it's the opposite. You increase the price. It's what we call perverse supply and demand curve, where you increase the price and demand actually increases. So there's a waiting period for some of these handbags. So you have to sign up on a list and you can buy it only from certain outlets and you cannot resell it also. Right? Those kind of pricing settings are very different. They're not based on any value, that's based on conspicuous consumption. I still remember about 10 years ago when I landed in Mumbai airport and I had half a day to kill. I was walking around and there was a Maserati showroom. And I said, what is someone doing with a Maserati in Mumbai? I mean, you can drive this car at more than 10 miles per hour. I mean, Maserati's claim to fame is 0 to 60 in 5 seconds. I don't know there's any road in India that you can go from 0 to 60 in 5 seconds and still come out of that. But I asked the guy, why are people buying Maseratis? I said only 3 every year. And people buy it, park it in their front yard and say, I have a Maserati. Then you have the luxury products that are affordable. Those are again priced on willingness to pay. And we are beginning to see that products like Hermes and those luxury brands of clothing, where they are beginning to suffer because people are saying, I'm not sure this is worth $1,000. So we went up from 800 to 850 to 900 to 1,000 because after COVID there was revenge buying. So they kept on raising prices. But now consumers are saying, not worth it. And there is a brand from Walmart that is selling similar handbags that has become the rage now in the US. But that's priced way below. So those are products where you don't really use cost at all as a business. It's what the market will do.
So, when it comes to companies' perspective, how are the expensive prices being placed for the customer?
It's based on what consumers are willing to pay. It's not nothing to do with the cost, because the cost is a fraction of what it actually is priced at. So it's not based on cost at all. It's just based on, in fact, in some places, it's based on squeezing distribution and not allowing the product to be sold in the market. So its pricing is based purely on how much money I can make out of it. So from a firm's perspective, they don't really have a pricing model for cities. Like some business there and says $1,000. Let's see if they will pay. And once you build a brand name, people pay. I mean, Lexus is a good example of this, by the way. The Lexus engine, the base, is the same as the Toyota Camry. Exact same. Camry is priced at $20-something thousand, Lexus is priced at $30-something thousand. Why? They just add some leather seats, some bells and whistles, and that's it. So the pricing is not based on cost or anything, it's based on perception, luxury perception. Perceptual pricing. I don't know if that answers your question.
I also understand incorrectly. Lexus, I believe it was exclusively made for US. They said luxury exclusive US.
Yeah, it was made because they were trying to enter the luxury market, but they did not want to compete with BMW and those players. So they said, let's come in at a slightly lower price point. But they did the same platform, basically. To this date, it's the same. The only thing is, the dealers will come and take the car from you for oil change, whereas Camry you have to drive it into the dealership. The other question, by the way, I think in India also now they're beginning to do that. Mahindra is beginning to do that. They're trying to build one uniform platform and then just change the body.
Same thing with Volkswagen Passat and the Skoda Super. Absolutely the same. With Volkswagen and Skoda. Differential price.
Well, you'll see that in washing machines and all this. It's basically one, maybe two companies making everything. You slap a different label on it and it's a different price. Whirlpool, cheaper price. As Bosch, it becomes more expensive price. Same product. If you look at the maintenance manuals, it'll actually say Bosch model number, Whirlpool model number. It's the same model, but Bosch is like they are for it. But the only way you can justify that in the long run is after sales service. At some point you have to justify. So Lexus is able to sell it because they offer those kind of. You walk into a Lexus dealership in the US, they'll give you coffee, they'll give you muffins, they'll give you all this kind. Walk into Toyota dealerships, they'll say, okay, drop your car and find your way home. So, bells and whistles.
Beautiful, really. You know, the Starbucks you were explaining, you guys are so crazy about Starbucks, and the country does not do a single thing of coffee.
Which US now?
US does not do coffee, but their coffee is internationally popular.
It's not the coffee, it's, honestly, coming from Canada, second cup in Canada makes far better coffee than Starbucks does. But
Experience.
Starbucks, the name. Brand name. Anyway. Thank you, folks. Oh, sorry. Which one?
Shop.
Yeah.
They are selling the same mobile phone, same specs in Redmi as well as in Poco. They are selling both in e-commerce platform. But the price is different. It's different from 4K to 5K. What are they like?
So, many places what they're trying to do is So most people don't know, for example, that it's the same brand, right? If you ask the average consumer, they don't know it. So it's basically saying I'm segmenting the market based on willingness to pay. And I might add one little thing here or one little thing there to justify it. Because in principle, you're not allowed to sell the same product at different prices to different consumers. That's illegal, technically. But you do that by just changing the brand name or changing something very tiny. And that way you can extract more profit. Again, it's basically leveraging the same platform to make different segments of the market buy at different prices. So, brand names. That's it. Actually, now the pricing has become almost similar. In the good old days, in India it has been more expensive than in the US. Now it is almost the same. There is a little bit of a difference, but again, what they do in the US is, so for example, this phone, I got it less than a year ago. I cannot use it on an Indian network. I mean, in principle, I cannot. In practice, I do. Indians are very good at this, right? You just walk into one of those kiosks and tell them, please unlock the phone for me, and boom, they unlock it. Right? But in principle, I'm not supposed to do it because it violates the contract. So that's how they justify the price difference. So they give you cheaper, but you also sign the 2-year contract. Oh yeah, you don't sign the 2-year contract. They get you something. That's how it goes. Right? Any other questions? Thank you. Use this one.
Yeah, you can.
Thank you, sir, for such an engaging and insightful session. Your experience has provided us with valuable knowledge and inspiring us to think in new ways. We look forward to welcome you again in future.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
There is no better way to conclude than with shared gratitude, and today we have much to be thankful for. To wrap up the session, I invite Srikanth to deliver the vote of thanks.
Good afternoon. Respected dignitaries, all of the dais and my dear friends. It's a pleasure to thank on behalf of the institution and my dear friends. And I would like to take this opportunity to thank Mr. Professor Ramdas Chandra he has given us inspiring words and made this session active. Thank you, sir. And I would like to extend my thanks to the esteemed director, A.G. Narayan, sir, whose guidance and vision has made this event possible. And heartfelt thanks to the dedicated faculty members whose guidance and commitment have played a vital role in completing this event and a grand success. And finally, I will take this opportunity to thank everyone who has been part of this event. Together, we have made this a milestone in our learning journey. Thank you.
By the way, I'm on LinkedIn if you guys want to connect with me. Some of you already have, but if you don't want to.
Sorry?